Babine Lake is our livelihood. We live from it. We're on it. We're in it. We're all the time. Babine Lake is very important to us, not just to us, but to our future generations. Our kids appreciate it. Our families, it's our mainstay. We live off of Babine Lake, and it's just our home. We live here.
85 to 90% of the Skeena River's sockeye will come through here, and they spawn in our various spawning channels and creeks. That includes both wild and enhanced salmon. The enhanced salmon predominantly coming from the Fulton and Pinkett programs. And once every couple days we'll send workers up and they walk through those streams and they find out how many salmon have actually spawned and made it to that spawning ground to pass on their genes to the next generation.
A little bit about the biosampling.
Sure. So each week we randomly select 50 fish that are usually have been collected for commercial fisheries, so they've already been passed, sadly. And we collect different lengths and measurements to get a sense of how the fish are doing in terms of a large population, from their physical size to, from their physical lengths. We also take scale samples, and those are looked at by people in labs, and they can determine age from that as well as do genetic testing. From the individuals that we do sample, since it is a random sample, we hope to kind of extrapolate that and get an idea of how the population is doing size-wise and genetically. Yeah, and this year actually, which is new, is we're also including jacks in that sample. So those younger fish that are coming back this year are also being sampled. So hopefully that genetics can lead to some good science in the future as well. Also brand new this year is we have a camera that's been installed, which allows fish to move through at night, which is their natural cycle to move at night. And this allows us to monitor them at 24 hours a day. So in past years, we've had to close the fence down at night, and those fish can get caught up behind the fence. But this allows at least some to escape through at night, and it gives us some really cool camera angles for the fish as they pass through.
Being out in Donald Siding is really important to us. Like I said, I learned a lot from my grandparents, and I know that in the stories that they passed on to me, that they learned that from their parents, they learned that from their grandparents. So these traditions are coming back for generations. Like, we've learned them from decades and decades of knowledge, and the history and our language, our culture is very important to us, and we want to make sure that we preserve it and pass it on to our younger generations. Where our salmon come from, they go out to the ocean as young fish, and they come back up through the rivers, through the Skeena River. And where our people primarily harvest them is at the Babine fence. This is our what we call a homestead. This is where our cabin is, our family. We preserve, we prepare our salmon down here in Donald's Landing. I've been taught this since I was a child. I started when I was about 7 years old. I was taught by my late grandmother, Mary Michelle, and they had a huge part in raising me. And this is my connection to this area. They brought us out here. They brought the cabins here. They started this community pretty much, and we had the opportunity to experience all of Babine Lake in all its beauty. And my grandparents taught me, my sisters, my uncles, how to do salmon. And the way that we've done it, it's not the same way we do it today, but when I was a child, we would set net out in just around the bend here, and we would set it out in the evening, leave it out for the night, and then go out in the early morning, usually about 6 a.m. And we would bring the net out, And it always came to this part of our processing area has always been this area. So we've always had gutting tables here. We had, my grandfather would be in the boat pulling each of the salmon out individually. I would be right beside him pulling them out as well. And once that was done, all the fish was in the water. My grandmother would have her cutting table set up, and I wasn't fortunate enough to learn right away, but I was busy cleaning the fish for her. And I would also be helping my grandfather bring fish from the lake to be hung into our dry shed here. And from there, we would leave it for one night so that it dries enough so that it's able to be processed and handled easier. Otherwise, if it's still wet, then it's too slippery and it's not easy to cut further. So we leave that for the night. The fish will come out of the drying shed and it'll go over to in front of the smokehouse, where we then start cutting strips off of it. We start preparing it for half dry or bet, and we prepare it for smoking. So that process also takes about a day and a half, depending on how much we get. On average, the number of fish that we get ranges between 100 right up to 400. So it depends on what use we're using it for. Sometimes it's just for our own personal purposes, for our households. And for other purposes, it's for like our traditional practices of potlatch. So that's where we get the higher amount of fish, because we're gonna be preparing to serve a lot of people in the potlatch system. And from the smoking process out of it comes the half dry, comes the bet, comes the side strips, and there's also every part of the fish is never wasted. When I was watching my grandmother when I was a kid, this is no longer practiced anymore, unfortunately. She would use the fish heads and she would put them into buckets and she would boil it for days. And what that did was it provided her with the oil to use for softening moose hide, because my grandmother was very successful at doing arts and crafts with moose hide. So with the fish heads, that was part of another process of her preserving moose hides. And so she would use the fish heads out of that, and that would be a process that she did alongside while waiting for the fish to dry and waiting for the fish to smoke. So those are two different things that were running side by side. These are the types of things that I learned from her. I watched her do it year after year, and it was an amazing process. So when we're preparing our fish harvest and our berries and all of our traditional foods, we want to make sure that we're carrying on that knowledge and passing it on to our future generations.